National Chief, thanks so much for joining us. You recently said this is a pivotal moment for First Nations. Why do you feel that way?
Well, I look at it in the sense of what have we gotten done so far in 2019, in the years before, and then 2020 going forward with this minority government. And I take stock and look at the fact that we did move and push government on ending boil water advisors, but they're not done yet. We pushed government to invest in housing and education and water with $21.4 billion over 7 fiscal years. We pushed them and got two very important key pieces of legislation passed, which is C-91 on languages, revitalization of our Indigenous languages, and then C-92 on child welfare. Now we have to see the full implementation of both those bills going forward. That was in the past number of years, but with this minority government now, in 2020 going forward, we've got to have the full implementation again of those bills, C-91 and C-92. We've got to have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples legislation passed, for the full implementation of that. We've got to implement all the calls to justice from the MMIW, Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The 230 plus calls to justice has to be implemented. Dealing with the youth suicide crisis as well. And then, I think of the throne speech, and the first time ever we've had an Indigenous chapter on reconciliation. And to have the Governor General, the Queen's representative, the Crown's representative, speak to the spirit and intent of treaties, and looking at the reestablishment of a treaty commissioner or a treaty commission is going to be key. So pivotal time, very important time, lots of work to get done. It's a minority government, so people will speculate as to how long do we have to work with this minority government. Is it 24 months or 36 months or 48 months? So we've got to really put our efforts in place, and if we can make sure that the government does what they say they're going to be doing in terms of priorities, we'll get results.
A lot on the horizon for the next year, certainly. As you've likely seen, there's an exclusive report out this morning from The Guardian today revealing what that RCMP were prepared to shoot Indigenous people during last January's raid on the Wet'suwet'en camps, and that they were prepared to apprehend children. What's your reaction to this story?
Well, one of the things I've always said, in Canada, all the judges and all the lawyers and all the police forces, they're sworn to uphold two laws, common law and civil law in Quebec. I've also said that there is First Nations law, natural law, creators law. And if the RCMP were sworn to also uphold that, you wouldn't have that use of force up at the Wet'suwet'en. So that's where we have to get in 2020 and beyond, is starting to look at restorative justice versus punitive justice systems in Canada, but respect for First Nations law and jurisdiction as well, in addition to common law and civil law. And Canada is such a great country, Canada is such a big country, there has to be space for that recognition about jurisdiction and First Nations law, natural law, creators law. That's my comment on that. That wouldn't have happened if the RCMP or any police force was sworn to uphold and protect our laws as well, in addition to common law and civil law.
Are you planning to speak with the RCMP, the federal government, about what's coming out in that report?
That'll be one of the things on our things to do, and a list of many things to do, but we'll add that to the list, no question. Because we always say we've got to build a better country together. And you have to make sure that those lines of communication are open and keep moving towards better policy and better legislation. You get a better country that way. You build a better country when there's respect for rights and title and jurisdiction. And that's definitely added to our things to do list in the new year.
We're hearing more from First Nations people, especially younger ones, millennials, saying that the AFN they feel is in lockstep with the patriarchal Indian Act system. What do you say to that?
I say we all want to move beyond the Indian Act. There's no question. The Indian Act's been around since 1876. And I've told and recommended to chiefs and councils and treaty areas and nations that if we want to move beyond the Indian Act, we have to create our own laws and occupy the field. And that's what we need to do when we reconstitute ourselves as nations. And that's the work going forward. And whether you do it by reserve, or band by band, or by treaty areas, or by nations, that's the work right across Canada. We need to move beyond the Indian Act. There's no question of that. And whether you're talking about citizenship versus band membership, whether you're talking about jurisdiction over your lands, whether you're talking about developing your own education system, your cultural, it's basically, the Indian Act definitely is passé, but it's up to First Nations themselves to exert their jurisdiction as to how they want to move beyond the Indian Act, reconstituting themselves as nations or by treaty territories. And so I agree with the young people. Like, we've got to move beyond the Indian Act, but it's a phased process. It's a plan-by-plan process, and one size won't fit all. And we've got to be respectful of the diversity across Canada.
Another issue that's right near where you are right now, the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation has asked for an equal share of the former U.S. Embassy across the street from Parliament Hill. Why hasn't the AFN agreed to give it to them, considering the new Indigenous Peoples building is on unceded Algonquin land?
We're working with the Algonquin chiefs, no question, and Grand Chief Paulson and Frankie from Kitigan ZB, and we're trying to find the best common ground, and with our partners, Métis National Council and the Inuit, ITK. I think we have a great opportunity. 100 Wellington is right across from the House of Commons. The Prime Minister gifted that to the MNC, AFN, and ITK a few years back. Now, through the Algonquin, we respect their land and territory. I'll always support that. There's no question about that. And there's some other opportunities, instead of not just one space at 100 Wellington, but a couple of other opportunities that are there. We want to make sure we work closely with the Algonquin chiefs to make sure we get this right and make sure that we have a good celebratory opening in the near future.
National Chief, the Me Too movement has brought scrutiny to some Indigenous leaders and questions about support for victims. The AFN adopted a code of conduct this year to address sexual harassment, but it only applies to its own executive. What else will the AFN be doing to introduce standards of behaviors for chiefs across the country? Again,
Assembly First Nations is we've reacted quickly to any kind of bullying or harassment. We don't condone that in any way, shape, or form. So we've got policies and procedures that impact on myself as National Chief and all the 10 regional chiefs, the CEO at the AFN, and all the staff, and we adhere to that. We'd hope that those good guidelines that are in place, those good policies that are in place, can be reflected if the chiefs and councils want to adopt them, because they're quite robust. And it's something that we want to keep supporting going forward. In 2019 and 2020 and beyond, there is no room for any kind of bullying or harassment in any way, shape, or form. So we've got policies and procedures in place. We believe they're very robust, they're very beneficial, and I would encourage any First Nation or Tribal Council or PTO to look at them and adopt them. Well, National Chief, as you say, a busy 2019 and looking to be a very busy 2020. We appreciate you taking some time for us here today. I appreciate the opportunity. I always say if we work together with governments, you're going to build a better country, because we have to keep investing in education and housing and water and infrastructure and dealing with the high youth suicides and too many of our kids in foster care. Once that gap closes, it's not only good for our people, it's good for Canada. National Chief, have yourself a great holiday and all the best in the new year. Yeah, same to you and your family. Happy holidays.